There is a road on the coast of Los Angeles County that has to be repaved constantly, not resurfaced every few years the way roads are. Constantly. Crews come back again and again because the asphalt keeps tearing itself apart, buckling into waves you can feel through the steering wheel, splitting open along seams that were smooth the last time anyone drove it. Ride a bicycle or a motorcycle down that stretch, and you are breaking a local ordinance because the city banned them from a 2-mile section for safety. Walk up into the neighborhoods above that road, and it gets stranger. Driveways that no longer meet their garages. Houses standing on steel beams because the ground under them tilted. Chasms in the open land 20 feet deep and 12 feet across. And on hundreds of those properties, homes with ocean views, homes on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. There is no natural gas. The gas company shut it off. The power company cut electricity to hundreds of homes as well. Not because of a fire, not because of a storm, because the entire piece of ground those houses sit on is sliding into the Pacific Ocean. And at its worst, it was moving about 1 foot per week, not per year, per week. Homes in one of the most expensive counties in America, on land that will not hold still. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that makes this different from every other story on this channel, is that it is not a warning about what might happen. It is happening, right now, today. And it has been happening, in slow motion, for 70 years. This is the Portuguese Bend landslide, part of the greater Altamira landslide complex on the Palos Verdes Peninsula, one of the largest continuously active landslides in the United States. And the reason to spend the next 20 minutes on it is not just the spectacle. It is that everything about this disaster was known in advance. There was no missing fault, no mystery, no surprise. Everybody knew, and it happened anyway. Start with what the last few years have actually looked like on the ground, because the details are hard to believe even with photographs. By the summer of 2024, the movement had accelerated to the point that the city of Rancho Palos Verdes was measuring it in inches per week rather than inches per year. At peak, surveyors were recording something on the order of 12 to 14 inches a week in the worst areas. NASA got involved. Scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory flew radar instruments over the peninsula and mapped the motion from the air, producing images of the whole hillside creeping seaward, and their assessment was blunt. The rates were more than enough to put human life and infrastructure at risk. Utilities went first. Southern California Gas suspended service to the Portuguese Bend community, because a gas line inside moving ground is not a gas line for long. It is a fuse. Then Southern California Edison de-energized parts of the area, cutting electricity to hundreds of homes, because power poles were leaning and lines were being pulled apart. Residents responded the way Californians do. They bought generators and put up solar panels, living on their own private power grids in a neighborhood 10 miles from one of the largest cities in America. The governor declared a state of emergency. Something like 650 homes have been affected in some way. Some were red-tagged, some were abandoned, some were pulled apart by the ground until they could not be saved. And then there is the chapel. On a bluff above the ocean stood a famous glass church called the Wayfarers' Chapel, a landmark building, a place where thousands of couples had been married, its walls made almost entirely of glass panes framed in redwood. Glass and moving ground do not coexist. As the land beneath it deformed, the panes began to crack, so they took it apart, piece by piece. Every pane numbered, every beam cataloged, disassembled and put into storage so it could one day be rebuilt somewhere the earth is not moving. That is the image that stays with me from this whole story. Not a collapse, a careful, methodical, piece-by-piece evacuation of a building, because the ground gave enough notice to do it politely. Now the question that makes this story different from every other one on this channel: how does anybody end up living on a landslide? And the answer is the uncomfortable part. They did not stumble onto it. The landslide was there first, and it was known. The whole southern flank of the Palos Verdes Peninsula is an ancient landslide complex. Geologists call the larger structure the Altamira complex, and it covers a substantial fraction of the entire city. This is not a hillside that recently became unstable. This is a hillside that has been failing, on and off for thousands of years, long before anyone built anything on it. The land is made of marine sedimentary rock that was lifted out of the sea. And within those layers, there is one particular kind of material that decides everything, a weak clay layer, ancient volcanic ash that has altered over geological time into a slick, soapy clay called bentonite. Bentonite is remarkable stuff. Dry, it is a solid layer of rock. Wet, it swells and becomes about as slippery as anything in nature. And these layers do not sit flat. They dip, tilted downward, toward the ocean. So picture the structure honestly. A thick stack of rock, resting on a tilted layer of natural lubricant, pointed at the sea. All it needs to move is water reaching that layer, and gravity does the rest. Every drop of rain that soaks into the ground, every leaking pipe, every irrigated lawn, adds to the pressure inside the slide plane and reduces the friction holding the whole mass in place. That is the entire mechanism. There is no fault. There is no earthquake required, just water, clay, and slope. And there is one more ingredient that never rests. The bottom of that slope is the Pacific Ocean. Every slide on Earth has what engineers call a toe, the downhill end of the moving mass. And the toe is what holds everything above it in place, the way the bottom card holds up the stack. At Portuguese Bend, the toe is the shoreline, and the shoreline is being chewed away by surf 24 hours a day, every day, for as long as there has been an ocean there. Waves remove material from the bottom of the slope. The slope responds by moving down to fill the gap. There is no version of this hillside that eventually stabilizes on its own, because the thing propping it up is being taken away continuously by the sea. That is why this landscape has been failing for thousands of years, and why it will keep failing long after everyone reading a property listing there today is gone. Which brings us to 1956, and the decision at the heart of this whole story. In the mid-1950s, the peninsula was being developed. County crews were extending a road across the area, moving earth, cutting into the slope and dumping fill. And during that construction, the ancient landslide woke up. The ground began to move in earnest. Around 150 homes were damaged or destroyed in the years that followed as the land crept out from under them. Litigation ran for years over whether the roadwork triggered it. And the practical result was that development in the moving zone essentially stopped. The area was deemed unsuitable, and it acquired a strange status. A beautiful piece of coastal California with spectacular views that nobody would insure and nobody would finance normally. And that produced something you would not expect. It produced a community. Because the houses there were cheap, relative to the rest of coastal Los Angeles. People bought them knowing exactly what the ground was. Residents in that neighborhood have said openly that the landslide was the best thing that ever happened to them, because it kept the developers out and kept the prices within reach. For decades, the ground moved a little every year, a few inches, enough to crack a driveway, enough that people learned to jack their houses back to level as routine maintenance the way other homeowners repaint. Whole families grew up doing it. They knew. It was the deal they made. And the details of that life are genuinely charming until they are not. Residents describe doors that stop closing properly every couple of years, and getting used to shaving a little off the frame. Tile floors that develop a lean you can feel walking across the kitchen. Fences that slowly stop being straight. Gardeners who know which part of the yard will be somewhere slightly different next spring. There is a whole vocabulary in that neighborhood that does not exist in other American suburbs, because the land is a participant in daily life rather than the stage it happens on. People compared notes on which contractor was best at re-leveling a house. It was normal. It was survivable. It was even a little bit of a badge of honor, living somewhere the earth itself was busy. For most of 70 years, that deal held. And then, the sky broke it. The winters of 2022 and 2023 brought extraordinary rainfall to Southern California, record-breaking in places. A region that had been in drought took years of water in a matter of months. And that water went into the ground. It filtered down through the fractured rock, down to the ancient clay layers. And the slide plane got wet in a way it had not been in living memory. Then the following winter brought more, and the landslide, which had been creeping politely for decades, accelerated by a factor of 3, 4, and eventually more. Movement that used to happen over the course of an entire year started happening in a single week. The city put it in exactly those terms in a letter to federal officials. The movement also began spreading outside the historically mapped landslide boundaries, which is the part that frightened everyone, because it meant homes that had never been considered at risk were suddenly on moving ground. Roads became impassable, utility corridors tore, sewer lines separated. The city declared a local emergency in October of 2023, and it has been extending that emergency every 60 days ever since. So, what do you actually do about a moving hillside? This is where the story becomes genuinely impressive, because the answer is not concrete, and it is not walls. You cannot stop a landslide of this size with engineering muscle. The mass is too large. What you can do is take away the thing that makes it move, water. So, the city started drilling. They installed dewatering wells. Deep wells sunk into the slide mass, with pumps running continuously to pull groundwater out from inside the moving ground before it can reach and lubricate the clay. 11 of them went in beginning in September of 2024. Together, they have been pulling water out at rates in the hundreds of gallons per minute. Stop and picture that number for a second. Hundreds of gallons a minute, every minute, around the clock, month after month. Water being taken out of a hillside so that the hillside will hold still. They also began filling surface fissures in the canyons. Because an open crack is a funnel, it takes rainwater straight down into the slide instead of letting it run off. Crews go out and pack those cracks shut before the rainy season, the way other cities clear storm drains. And there is one detail in the engineering that tells you everything about the problem. A dewatering well sits inside moving ground, which means the well itself moves, which means the pipes bend, the casings shear, and the wells have to be maintained, repaired, and sometimes re-drilled, because the thing they are installed in will not stay still long enough to leave them alone. The city is running a piece of permanent infrastructure inside a machine that is actively trying to destroy it. And it worked, not perfectly, not permanently, but measurably. Movement that peaked around 12 to 14 inches a week dropped through the following year, down to 8, then down toward 1.5 to 2 inches a week by early 2026. Geologists were careful to say the dry weather deserved as much credit as the wells, but the numbers came down. Homes stopped tearing. The gas company began upgrading and testing its infrastructure to restore service in some areas. Officials have said that if the movement can be brought back to its historic background rate, the power company will consider re-energizing the neighborhood. Then this past winter brought rain again, and the movement ticked back up. A couple of inches a week in Portuguese Bend, slightly more in the neighboring Abalone Cove slide, still a fraction of the peak, but up. And that is the honest shape of this thing. It is not a disaster that ends. It is a system with a throttle, and the throttle is rainfall. The cost of holding that throttle down is the part nobody expects. Rancho Palos Verdes is a small city. Its annual budget to run everything, police contracts, parks, staff, roads, is on the order of $39 million. The landslide response has consumed an amount approaching that entire annual budget in a single effort, with tens of millions committed since 2022 and more added every time the council meets. They have taken money from other infrastructure projects to keep the pumps running. They pursued a large federal resilience grant to fund the long-term remediation project. A small suburban city is now effectively in the business of full-time geotechnical engineering because the alternative is losing a piece of itself. Meanwhile, the city passed an emergency ordinance letting homeowners do things no normal building code allows, putting houses up on steel I-beams, placing them on temporary cradle structures, living in modular units on their own property while they try to keep the main house level. That ordinance runs through the end of this year, and the emergency is expected to continue beyond it. Now, the honest section, because this channel does not do fake countdowns. I am not going to tell you Palos Verdes is going to slide into the ocean tomorrow and take the neighborhood with it in one dramatic collapse. That is not what this kind of landslide does. This is a slow-moving translational slide, a mass creeping down a lubricated plain, and its danger is measured in years of accumulated damage rather than in a single catastrophic moment. Nobody has died in the Portuguese Bend landslide, The houses are being destroyed at walking pace. But I am also not going to soften what the geology says. This slide has been active since 1956 and it has never stopped. It has only changed speed. The clay layer is still there. The slope still tilts toward the sea. And in a climate where wet years appear to be getting wetter, the throttle gets pushed more often. The dewatering wells are not a cure. They are life support. And somebody has to keep paying the electricity bill on those pumps forever. There is also a separate lesson from just up the coast. In 2025, a section of coastal bluff several hundred feet wide gave way near a different part of the peninsula, dropping 30 to 40 feet, a few miles from the main slide area. City officials described it as an isolated subsidence rather than part of the main complex. But it is a reminder that this entire landform, the whole peninsula, is made of the same uplifted marine rock with the same weak layers inside it, and the ocean is at the bottom of all of it, cutting away the toe of every slope, every single day, forever. So, 3 futures, the honest way to hold Palos Verdes. Future 1, and this is the realistic middle-of-the-road outcome. The fight continues and it works well enough. The wells keep pumping, the fissures keep getting filled. Wet winters cause flare-ups, dry years bring relief, and the movement stays low enough that utilities come back and most of the neighborhood survives in some form. Permanently expensive, permanently monitored, a suburb on life support that keeps its ocean view. Future 2, the slow surrender. Another sequence of extraordinary wet years. The movement climbs again. The costs outrun what a small city can carry. And property by property, the area converts from neighborhood to open space. This is already partly happening. Some homes have been bought out, some have been removed, trails have been closed and will not reopen in the form anyone remembers. In this future, the map slowly changes color from residential to preserve, not in a day, but over a couple of decades. Future 3, the acceleration nobody wants. A landslide of this type can, under the right conditions, transition from creeping to rapid movement. That is not the expectation here. The geology and the monitoring both argue against a sudden, catastrophic failure of the whole complex. But the reason there is a monitoring program at all, the reason the surveys happen every 2 months and get presented to a city council in public, is that nobody wants to find out the hard way. The instruments exist precisely so that this future stays theoretical. Here is my honest opinion. After everything the research shows, every other episode of this channel has been about a threat that hides, the fault under Los Angeles that nobody found until 1999, the fault under Charleston that nobody has found yet, the bulge on a mountain that had never been watched before. Palos Verdes is the opposite, nothing hid. The landslide was mapped, the clay was understood. The 1956 failure was documented and litigated in public. Every buyer of every one of those houses could learn what the ground was, and many of them did, and chose it anyway. Because the view was worth it, and the price was fair, and the ground only moved a few inches a year. That is not stupidity. That is the same calculation every one of us makes about where we live. Everybody lives somewhere. Every somewhere has a risk. What Palos Verdes shows, in a way no earthquake scenario ever can, is what happens when the risk you accepted quietly changes its terms. The residents did not break the deal, the rainfall did. And now, a small city is spending its entire annual budget running pumps to slow down gravity, which is the most human sentence in this entire series. The ground beneath that neighborhood is not going to stop. It is going to be negotiated with, year after year, by people who understood the bargain better than most Americans understand theirs. So, now I want to hear from you. Would you buy a house on a known landslide if the view was spectacular and the price was half of what it should be? Be honest. I think more of you would say yes than expect to. Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you are in Southern California, or if you have ever driven that stretch of coast road and felt the pavement rolling under your tires, tell me about it. If this video showed you something you had never heard of, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And subscribe with notifications on, because next, we go to Oregon, to the deepest lake in the United States. Water so clear that scientists lower instruments hundreds of feet and still see them. That lake sits in the crater of a mountain that erased itself in one of the largest eruptions in North American history. Native people of the region watched it happen, and they told the story of that day, accurately, for 7,700 years, until geologists finally confirmed the details in the 20th century. That story is next. The ground beneath America is speaking. Make sure you are listening.